Okay, I'll introduce our next set of speakers, but I'm going to throw them off guard a little bit and do what I did to Brian. So I'm not going to read all of their bio. I'm just going to read some brief information. So first we have Jeff Geertz, and he is a special projects manager with the Community Development Division of the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And then we have Tom Price. He is Principal Water Resources Engineer at the Conservation Design Forum. And then we also have Jim Patrick, who is the City Administrator for the City of Storm Lake. And then I have Neil. Is Neil here? Okay. Neil, you were supposed to bring a bio, but it's okay because I'm going to throw you off guard. So you can tell us a little bit about yourself. He's with Bolton and Mang. But each one of you, let us know how did you become interested in water resources and being involved in stormwater management? And then you can go ahead and start presenting.
Probably just as a kid, I was always playing in the local creeks and all of that sort of thing, and I was just always fascinated by the way water moved through, channels and the landscape and all of that, and so I just always, as a even small child, been really fascinated by water. So
okay.
Yeah.
For me, it's probably similar to what Tom just stated, and as Brian will probably note, going to St. Ambrose, which has had its stormwater opportunities through the years. One used to be able to canoe in one of the parking lots there after a good rainfall event, so you got to appreciate urban stormwater issues well at college.
As city manager, water is a resource, and it's not a nuisance, as you'll hear in the next presentation behind ours. But it's something I grew up in out in the Rocky Mountains, and water is a premium out there, not only to look at and play in, but for farming and taking care of crops. And so it's always been important to protect that resource.
Come on, Neil. Come on down. I'm trying to get all these mics.
For you that don't know me, I'm just a river rat. I grew up in the banks of the Des Moines River in northern Iowa. My dad was a tiler, so I've been around it my whole life.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start out the discussion this afternoon for just a couple of minutes and then turn it over to the pros. But you've already heard a little bit of a hint of what we're going to talk about from Jim Patrick. We're really talking, and we're going to continue this theme on the urban stormwater, but really talking about water as a resource or as an asset. In our agency, particularly in community development, we're starting to lay the groundwork to really work with local elected officials, assessors, those kind of folks to view their communities or the built environment within their community as an asset, and that they're actually managing a portfolio that's worth millions, or in some cases probably billions of dollars, and really view that as managing a portfolio, and are you leveraging that portfolio for its greatest value. It's the same thing with stormwater today. So we're going to talk about changing that paradigm, particularly the paradigm here with urban stormwater, and looking at, there's a lot of good stuff happening in Iowa. We just saw a couple of great examples from Brian in the city of Davenport. We're starting to move beyond the site level and really looking at attacking these issues at the district and the citywide level and how we change the paradigm. Taking a different perspective, looking at things differently as we change the paradigm, because we have to. If you look at the wastewater pending regulations, the additional capital costs, the operations and maintenance costs is going to require us to change the paradigm of how we view management of water as a resource in our communities. If you look at the issues that we're facing from a water supply issue and the impacts that can have from an economic development standpoint, community health standpoint, all those types of issues, we need to change the paradigm. At the same time, we're dealing with issues with flooding, we're dealing with issues with droughts, we have questions about future water supply in particular parts of the state. At the same time, we have practices like this where why do we build and maintain these large parking lots? We put the expense into building them, maintaining them. If we fly once a year, we don't go out and buy an airplane. But for once a year event at a mall like this, we build these huge parking lots. We need to think about changing that paradigm. Well, like this near my house, this is a project that went in about 10 years ago. A school was built just down the street from here, put in a 35 or 30-foot wide road here that increased speeds in an area next to a school where you think you'd want to promote pedestrian safety, pedestrian access, narrower street crossings, not having the road or the sidewalks covered with snow a couple months out of the year, prohibiting people from walking to the school just a half mile down the road. And then you have to maintain all that extra width year in and year out for the years to come. Another example, here's actually a good and a bad example. This is a project we're currently working on right now where the city in the lower right has design work done. We'll be starting construction on a project this spring. It's really going to take a really innovative approach at how we get stormwater managed on an urban street project with this kind of new intake type of design that's being used on this project. But at the same time they're working to do good, we're taking that existing 22-foot wide road and making it 26. And I asked, well, why are we making the road bigger? Because this isn't an area where there's additional development planned. It's just, it's a 100-year-old area that's lacking some infrastructure. Well, because our ordinance requires that. Well, whose ordinance is it anyway? So why are we putting in this extra 4 foot of width? And, this is probably another 12 or 13,000 square feet on this project. So just thinking about how do we do these things more efficiently and effectively going forth. So it's time to change that paradigm, how we treat the water. It's time to take a new look and take action. It's to take a look at our infrastructure projects, not just as a street project or a sanitary sewer project or a stormwater project, but it's really a quality of life project. It's a community amenity. It's a community health project. It's air quality. It's habitat. It's economic development. It's all of those things working on an integrated fashion. So that's what we're going to talk about the rest of the time we have this afternoon. The Iowa Economic Development Authority partnered with the City of Storm Lake last year to develop what we were calling a community water template. It's really looking at, from a community-wide perspective, how do we integrate and plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater in a really holistic fashion. So we're going to talk about how do you renovate public-private properties, high-performance materials and systems, the multiple benefits and values you can get from taking an integrated approach to infrastructure. Looking at how do you, again, look at your community and infrastructure as an asset. How do you best leverage that portfolio to create long-term benefits and values through integration of the high-performance, ecologically focused green infrastructure strategies? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Patrick to provide the city perspective, and then Tom Price will actually get into the template.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here to talk about Storm Lake a little bit and water resources. Again, our history in Storm Lake, we have a long history tied to the lake primarily. And we've been doing dredging. We're on our probably second or third iteration of dredging. And on this iteration, we're probably about 10, 11 years into the process. So taking care of water quality. Taking care of water quality is important to us in the lake. It's one of the 2 fisheries for walleye in the state, and we try to do our best in taking care of the lake. In 2006, we had the opportunity to create the state's first rain garden, and you'll see some pictures a little bit later on, I think, on that one. When we put our resort in place, stormwater became even more important, and that was back in about 2008, 2009. Being right on the lake and trying to sell the lake made it even more important for us to take care of stormwater. And then we, along the way there in about 2008, 2009, put in some rain gardens. Nope, gone the wrong way, sorry. So, keeping it the theme of Jeff, you know, we as city managers or city staff a lot of times think about things being the same, and we become complacent and pretty well in tune with what we're doing, and it comes natural to us, and we've done it 1,000 times, and nothing could go wrong, right? Well, think again. So since 2010, you know, council, I told you council was kind of interested in stormwater to a certain degree. 2010, we had sort of a shift in thinking, and stormwater management, environmental issues became important, so important that it became one of the 5 core topics in our strategic plan for the city. Along with that, probably part of that, we had subdivisions that were flooding out. And when I say flooding out, a lot of times water would be up to the doorstep. We had bypass events in the city. And stormwater was a nuisance, I'll tell you that right now. Stormwater is a nuisance because it was flooding basements, it was flooding streets. We were able to secure some FEMA funds to enlarge our wastewater treatment plant, put in some additional sewer mains, and do some work in getting rid of the I&I, the water that we were dealing with. But along with that, we started working on projects like the East Central project. East Central, let me go to it and we'll come back. East Central took care of the water in the Forest subdivision all the way down to the lake through a bio-treatment train. And Bolton Mink was very successful in putting that together. In fact, last year, thanks to this conference, we were awarded we were given an award for that project. But we got serious about stormwater mitigation issues, and we started to put in additional rain gardens, the bio-treatment train, of course, that you see here. And since then, again, we've continued to move forward. We have 2 projects happening thanks to the state flood mitigation funds. We have the industrial park project that we have a pre-construction meeting this Friday. It's a $1.6 million project to remove flooding and standing water in the industrial park, kind of like that, using micro pools, bioswales, and a treatment train in the industrial park. We also have a North Central improvement project, about a $2.4 million, if I recall right, Neil. Again, emptying the stormwater from 2 subdivisions behind the high school and cleaning up the water issues there, treating it in a pond, an infiltration pond, and then bioswales on out to a discharge point. Recent events continue to shape who we are. We've passed one of the first post-construction stormwater ordinances, I think, in the state. We were accepted as the demonstration community for best management practices in the state. It's a humbling experience. We have a lot to do. We haven't arrived yet. We have a list of projects now that, as you will see in our further discussion, give us a whole laundry list of things that need to be done. This template is not a starting gun. It's something that we've been working on for a while, but this template is very valuable to the city because now we have a list of projects, and as we'll talk about a little bit more in the presentation, it becomes useful. I was contacted about a week ago on some possible funding on flood mitigation issues. And it's very easy to go back to the document and say, here's our highest priorities, and this is why. Thanks to Neil, we were able to get some engineer quotes and get the grant in within 2 days. So the template is a great resource for taking care of water, not only stormwater. We've included wastewater as well as drinking water and have plans in store for all of those. I might mention that we're one of 2 pilot communities in the state for nutrient trading. A speaker this morning was talking a little bit about nutrient trading. The Iowa League of Cities is in the process of trying to put together a program with the help of the Nutrient Center here in Iowa. And Dubuque and Storm Lake are going to kind of be the pilot projects, if you will, or pilot cities to try to make that, put those plans together and that program together. So I want to thank, at this point, I would like to thank IEDA for their assistance in getting this started and introduce Tom, who is with CDF, Conservation Design Forum, who partnered with Bolton Mink in putting this process together and the plan together, and we're excited about it. Tom, thanks. I guess we're supposed to have this too.
All right. So I'm going to go a little bit over the plan, and this will be sort of the whirlwind tour because we don't have a lot of time here. So I will go quickly, and hopefully everybody can keep up. I think we talked a little bit Storm Lake in Buena Vista County, in the northwest portion of the state. Storm Lake is part of a larger watershed, but the focus of this project was it was on the city of Storm Lake. And so there's a recognition that we do have a larger watershed here, but this project was about, urban green infrastructure. And so that is the focus of what this plan is about. And we had a number of goals that were set out very early on. The big part really in the beginning was integration of the stormwater, wastewater, and water supply, and just integration of that with what's traditionally gray infrastructure. So streets, storm sewers, those sorts of things, try to make our landscapes and every surface really provide multiple benefits and hold its own water. And so that was really the focus of a lot of these goals, and with a big part of that protecting the lake. So as Jim said, and Jim's really done a ton of work throughout the city, and along with Bolton and Mank, and it was great that Jeff got into this and we all got together because they've really done a lot of work already. And so really this was just building on some of that early work and trying to develop, sort of formalize some things in terms of what can be done. One of the things is from what I've told, is this is the first rain garden or first bioretention in the state of Iowa. Was right here in Storm Lake. So that's great. In this image, it was actually just recently replanted. That's why you don't see any plants there. But we happened to be there when it was raining and could see that it didn't get very far past right in the opening, and it was already infiltrating. But they've also started to see some on private property. This is a McDonald's, and they've put in some bioretention there, and this is just one of the areas of the site. They've really got it in several areas of this small McDonald's site. So in terms of the outline of the project, follows fairly basic planning process, analysis of existing conditions, establishment of performance goals, develop the plan and conduct the analysis on that plan, and then come up with implementation. So the existing conditions, we looked at drainage and flooding, so there was a quantity portion of this, not just water quality, and then certainly we looked at pollutant loading though as well. And so some modeling was done throughout the city, and this highlights, the darker the blue is, the more frequent the flooding. And so highlighted those areas that were problematic and delineated the drainage areas and help us to guide us where some projects might go. And then also some pollutant loading analysis, which was really just based on land use. Some of you that might do this kind of work, the simple method, not terribly complicated, but really helped to identify where the most heaviest loads would come from, and then target work in those areas. So we did it for total suspended solids. The The darker red are the areas of the highest pollutant loading. The blue are the areas of the lowest total suspended solids loading. Same thing for total phosphorus. And then finally for nitrogen. And typically, again, the darker colors are the higher loading areas. So we know where those land uses are where we want to focus our effort. We developed some performance goals. We looked at a number of different things around both nationally and locally. We ended up really staying largely with the State Stormwater Manual and SUDAS and what Storm Lake had already put into their own ordinance. But the goal here is retrofitting the whole city to eventually meet these standards. And then some standards for wastewater and water as well. And the approach we took was the idea of a toolbox, and these sort of build up to each other. Toolbox, and then templates, and then scenarios. And to help sort of illustrate that, on the left here, we've got a series of tools, permeable paving, bioretention, some others I'll talk about. And those come together in then a series of templates, how we might integrate those tools into a larger land use template. And then we take each of those land uses, aggregate it, essentially distribute it around the watershed, and then see what that does in terms of the reduction in pollutant loads. So some of the tools in the toolbox is listing here. I will go take a look at a couple of these. We did assessments on what the performance of each of these tools would be using some standard. The Minnesota Minimal Impact Design Manual was a good resource, and so we used that to generally estimate what the performance of each of these practices would be from a water quality perspective. And then we did water quantity modeling as well. And in this case, we used HydroCAD, but you can use many of the stormwater methods. And one thing you'll notice, we've got clay soils, quite low infiltration capacities, but these practices still can really work well to temporarily store the water and slow it down and give it a chance to evaporate and infiltrate. So green roofs, we looked at, and so for each of these, we've got expected performance of for each of these different practices. So for green roof, and then provide some different examples of each of those. Same thing for permeable paving, a little bit on how it works, what it looks like, and then again, some example projects to show kind of on the ground sorts of implementation. Same thing by retention and using in kind of a range from very urban sort of downtown situations to more residential areas to campuses. Naturalized swales, naturalized retention. We also looked at rainwater harvesting for use in irrigation and other practices, so integration of the stormwater and water for water conservation. And that can happen at very small scale in terms of residential to the very large scale, looking at more commercial sized that really have a large reduction and water conservation piece to them. And then finally at wastewater, and we looked at some upgrades to existing plants, but also looking at some areas where we can do some more distributed wastewater treatment, on-site treatment that can be done in ways that can be amenities. Picture on the lower left is actually a wastewater treatment facility. So using plant material in sort of a greenhouse setting to provide wastewater treatment to meet full standards. So those are the tools, and then we arrange the tools on a range of sort of standard templates, residential being the first. And so we can do permeable paving in the streets, by retention, distributed throughout, and then again, some precedent projects. This one in Milwaukee, Charles City was permeable paving, Carbon Cliff, Illinois, and then looking at some multifamily as well. This site, other than the building, almost the entire site is essentially water holding landscape. So all of the landscape you see there, the paving, is all either bioretention or permeable paving to hold the water on the site. And then some analysis of how the performance of those, and looking at commercial areas. Again, just some precedent projects. on how we can get it to meet these standards on even existing areas. And then finally, in sort of downtown areas, this is West Union, project we worked on with Jeff. And so essentially the entire cross-section is water storage. And then there's planters, and you can see here, essentially that gravel's building face to building face. And then bioretention bump outs, permeable paving streets. And then again, analysis of the results. And we're seeing analysis even up to 100-year event that we are getting, peak flow reductions of 80% reduction. So these aren't just water quality practices. They can be used to address the drainage problems in those in these areas as well. And then some campus examples, some schools. And then we took these, so we've got the tools and the templates that we talked about, and then applying these throughout the city. What if we did this throughout the whole city? Really, and that's what's great about Jim and Jeff is taking the long view. This is not going to happen overnight. We're not advocating for tearing up perfectly good streets, but as streets need to be repaved, is to look at doing some of these things. As parking lots need to be repaved, as landscape goes in, is take those opportunities to integrate the green infrastructure. And if we do that, what would be the outcome of that? So this is the total suspended solids map I showed before, with the red being the areas of highest loading. So if we did this throughout the city, we essentially turn the whole part of the city in terms of pollutant loading analysis to to the blue areas. Same with the total phosphorus, with the darker colors being the higher loadings, essentially turned it all to the lowest loading rates. So overall, citywide, again, long-term plan, getting about 80 to 85% reduction in total suspended solids, 70 to 75% reduction in total phosphorus, while also addressing some of these drainage problems. And we did an analysis on the drainage as well, looking at how much storage do we actually need in order to address each of those flooding problems, and then went through and looked at essentially what proportion of these drainage areas would we have to implement these practices in order to eliminate those flood areas. And then as far as implementation goes, the city, there's really sort of two parts to this. There's more of a programmatic piece. So as I mentioned before, as streets are getting repaved, as other sort of infrastructure projects need to be done, that looking at doing those in permeable landscapes, but there also needed to be some very more site-specific projects. And Jim already talked about some of these, but there's also some additional ones. You'll see Erie, will be their first permeable paving street in Storm Lake, and also looking at some bioreactor areas to help treat actually some of the agricultural areas. And then some of the looking at their two processing plants here, and so looking at some of the stormwater runoff that comes off of those areas as a result of the product trucks moving in and out, and some of the wash off from those to help keep that out of the lake and restore some of that. So this is just really a sampling of sort of site-specific areas in addition to some of those programmatic elements. And Jim, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the process of implementation and how you plan to move forward.
Thanks, Tom. I think as we move forward, this has been a great tool, as I mentioned earlier, to put together our capital improvement program and also start looking at ways of going out and seeking grant funds, because now we have a focused target. We have a focus on where we want to go and what's the most important to the city and how much is it going to cost to achieve those results. And so this has been a great tool. As I mentioned, we've already used it. I might mention, we haven't told you the explanation of what a restorer is. A restorer is a hydroponics on steroids is what I like to call it. It's a floating island of plants. And so it takes the wetland idea, in fact, you can put them in wetlands. You can take the wetland idea and put it on a floating island, circulate the water through it, and reduce your nutrients as well as your bacteria. It'll take care of the bacteria and TSS. I think we're ready for questions, aren't we, Pat?
Any questions?
We explained it perfectly.
Go ahead.
I saw a slide up there, the reduction in the 1% annual dam flood. Did you say there was an 80% reduction in peak or volume?
Peak. So the volume reduction is going to depend on soils, but we're expecting, based on the modeling that, we ought to be able to get kind of 20-30% reduction in volumes, depending on which land use, and that's even with the clay soils.
Is that just storage, attenuation, or is it actual, you're not infiltrating all that?
So the thing to think about is when you are putting in these practices that you attempt, essentially the whole street cross section, for example, you get through paving, or a whole parking lot, that whole area becomes an infiltrating area. So even at 1/10 of an inch an hour, if you hold that water for 24 hours, that's 2.5 inches of runoff that you can infiltrate. So it's sort of substituting space for time, if you will. You don't have a lot of, you can't get in very fast, but you have more area to do it. So.
You mentioned the water quality trading project. Who's going to provide the numbers that underlie that project for trading this and that?
Great question. Dr. Weber, who is a professor over at University of Iowa Hydraulics Center, is doing the modeling of not only runoff, he's already done a lot of the modeling of runoff, stormwater runoff. He's now working on the nutrient aspects, and he's part of the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Center. And so we're depending upon him to come up with the science. And then we have some folks that have worked around the United States to start putting a program together that would fit Iowa.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you very much.
A pleasure.